All right. Hello and welcome to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I know you're all proud that I said the right show this time. Corey Crisan, the beat writer for Pitt Athletics and various other things over at DK Pittsburgh Sports, is here with us. It's time for a new show. Corey, how are you doing, man?
Hey, we love the Pirates Fan Forum too. We love both shows. This is our show, and I'm doing great, Gary. I am preparing for the trip to lovely Western New York. All of the bread and milk is sold out at the Wegmans nearby in Western New York. If you know Wegmans, you know. If not, get to a Wegmans someday.
You and Dayon ought to head up there with a trunk full of bread and start selling it, on the way, and a couple tanks of gas like extra in your trunk. It'll be great. Dayon's not scared at all. I heard him on the Ramon show. He loves snow, so he to him this is just Winnipeg light, I think.
I guess. I guess so. For me, I went to college at Syracuse, so I know what it can get like. Right. And I know what lake effect snow means, and I know what wind gusts mean. So this will be, if nothing else, an interesting ride, and a good morning to you as well, Ryan. Thanks for joining us live. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Twitter. We're live on YouTube, on DK Pittsburgh Sports, on Pitt, chopping up some Pitt hoops, Gary. I think it's a good time to have I guess 99% Pitt hoop show. We'll get to one little football point later, but
it's a good time to kind of stop and reset and just think about what we've seen now, because we've gone through the non-conference schedule. We've gotten into the ACC schedule a little bit. I think it's fair to say, Corey, neither of us thought they were going to take down Duke, or they were poised to be favored in that matchup or anything. We thought that was going to be a tough game for them. Duke is a good team. Mm-hmm. But they weren't even really competitive. And it got a lot. I mean, even the final score, 75-53, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. I mean, I was following you on the live file. I'm sure a lot of people were. And I'm looking at your notes even. I think 3 or 4 times in there, you were like, it's over. Really no point in going any further with this one.
Well, no, I mean, in midway of the second half, it was like, what are we doing here? And that game got so out of hand so quickly. But I think the big point that we want to talk about, it's not really about the game specifically in and of itself. I think it's more of the litmus test of where Pitt is with respect to Duke. Remember, this team with Jamarius Burton, Nelly Cummings, Nike Sabandi, Greg Elliott, in the cast of characters that returned for this year's team, that team competed with Duke for a half in Durham. And obviously the run they went on, battle for first place, end of the season. This is a different team from that team. And I think what we're seeing here, and you and I talked about this a bit before we got on air, this team's really missing Jamarius Burton. This team doesn't have a guy like Jamarius Burton that's able to penetrate and create, that's able to dribble, drive, and create, that's able to get his own look and get to the basket the way Burton was. There's been games this season where Pitt just keeps shooting threes up, and it's like, well, get to the basket, draw something up for Federico or the Twins, get something into the basket. Jeff Capel said they're not built to go down low. So that, to me, is a launching point for a discussion of not just how much different this team is from last year's team that went to an NCAA tournament, but how does this team now, at 1-4 at the bottom of the ACC through 5 games, get itself back up?
I mean, for one thing, I would prefer a coach not acknowledge a glaring weakness in public like that.
Yeah.
I think that's not the impression I think you or I had of this team going into this season. I think we thought their strength probably would be down low. With Federico coming back and Guillermo evolving a little bit, we felt like there was going to be a little bit more opportunity for them to work the ball inside. More than that, though, and more than just saying, oh, we lost all these seniors and now we have all these freshmen and sophomores, I think Burton almost was the one that flipped the switch from all the threes to it's time to start penetrating, because things weren't falling. And I can count multiple times last year where there was a definitive moment where Burton just decided, nope, I'm driving the lane. Enough of this. And he would just change the game. And next thing you know, Henson's popping threes because he's getting open looks. And not seeing that this year.
Well, I mean, think of the Mississippi State game of the NCAA tournament. Burton drives and creates that shot with 10 seconds to go. And yeah, that's a big point of the game that's missing right now, because right now, Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, Ish Leggett, those guys don't do what Burton did. And the sum of those three also don't do what Burton did. And as a result, Jeff Capel has to adjust. Jeff Capel has to adjust the strategy. Now, again, what to make of the Duke loss specifically, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that was just Duke being really darn good, which for my money, they're the best team in the ACC, or if that was Pitt showing their warts and showing that they still have some more room to grow. And I think you can look back to the Louisville win, the game prior, last Saturday. Like, that wasn't a comfortable win. The point total looks fine.
Sure.
But that wasn't a comfortable win for Pitt. They did not play their best ball against a pretty bad Louisville team.
And I would also say they're probably not that much better than Louisville either. I think they're probably built about the same. A lot of youth. You're hoping a lot of that youth steps up. A lot of talented youth. I don't think that there's a lot of guys that you want to flush here. But as you wrote too, a very good point you made about pumping the brakes on Bub Carrington a little bit for this whole one and done thing. I've been there for a few weeks. So, I guess it was so obvious I didn't even think to bring it up. But when you wrote it, it really, really came clear to me. Yeah, that's not what he is. In fact, there's some applications I kind of think Jalen is moving ahead of him a little bit.
I saw progress from Jalen Lowe, and I think that part of that, like you mentioned there, Jalen, so to speak, moving ahead of Bub, is that teams are really game planning hard for Bub Carrington. Those two guards for Duke put the clamps on him. 0 for 10 to start the game was Bub, and really didn't get much going until late in the second half when the game was out of hand.
Right.
And to me, I think what we saw early in the season from Bub was a lot of the potential that he could be. But like I wrote, and I'm not going to get too far into that, I appreciate the shout. These one-and-done NBA players that go into college basketball, leave after 1 year, I don't want to say dominate, but they find ways to actually make impacts in these games. And Bub Carrington was a non-factor against Duke. And this isn't the first time against a really good opponent where Bub has been silenced. So that's why I prompted to say, hey, let's chill on this kid. The potential's there. I'm not going to ignore potential.
Right.
Potential's there, build's there, athletic ability's there. He has to develop his game and has to be more well-rounded. And the fact that he's in some ways one-dimensional right now makes it way easier, and especially for teams like Duke, where they're very deep. They pulled their starters and put their reserves in and put, John Shire had the end of the bench, quote unquote scrubs come in. Well, one of those scrubs was like the 12th rated recruit in the country this year. So that's the level Duke is at. But when you have those two freshman guards, McCain, and I think it was Foster, just lock down Carrington for the course of 35 minutes, that's a concern for me. And they couldn't open up any looks for him. And he's not a guy that is fully at the ability, like we talked about with Jamarius Burton, that could just create his own look at the snap of a finger.
Right. Let's take a quick break because it's also time for that, as well as realizing what Bub Carrington is, because I have another couple points on him when we come back. All right, we're back to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network, and we're going to pick up talking about Bub Carrington because there's a lot to cover there. I think, first, very talented kid.
Oh, I agree.
But And I think he's going to be a good basketball player. I do. I think he just has one bad thing going for him. He's just like a left-handed power hitter in baseball. Okay, I like to relate it back to that.
I'm down.
He can do a lot of things, beautiful things. But there's one real easy way to make sure he doesn't do anything. And it's just to make sure that you throw a lefty at him. He's never going to touch it. Well, Carrington has a fatal flaw, and it got identified really early. And it doesn't matter the level of competition. They have been able to shut him down just schematically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and when you can do that to a guy, it doesn't matter what else he does. So until he can conquer that, being able to go left or right from the point, there's just not going to be an effective game for him.
Do you think it would behoove Jeff Capel to move Jalen Lowe to the 1 and let Bub run the 2 to get the ball out of Bub's hands, so to speak, that way?
I do, but I ultimately think that this program would do better if Bub wound up being the fully formed 1. So it might be worth sacrificing some games here to make sure it happens. Thing is, I'm just not seeing it. And I don't even know if he's recognizing what they're trying to do to him yet, which scares me even more because Jeff Capel's telling him. I mean, when TV analysts are talking about things consistently, sometimes you can say, okay, well, that's the notes. They're getting their information from talking to the coaches about what they're going to do and what they're seeing. And they're not just making this up. They're not watching Pitt every game in and game out. So when they're saying it consistently, they're hearing that from the coaches. He's pounding them with that.
Were you at the Pete for this one?
I was not, sir.
Okay,
no.
so you watched on television. What were they saying?
Oh, they start every single one of them with Bub can't go to the left, and or Bub can't go to the right. I mean, and Jalen Lowe looks like he's passing him by. Federico's been really disappointing this year. That's what they say.
Which he has. And by the way, one of those analysts for that Duke game was Jim Boeheim.
Sure.
Who obviously knows Jeff Capel pretty well.
I will say Jim Boeheim, like, I know people are predetermined to hate him in this market. Not you, of course, Corey, but he is probably overly fair because he's got the coaching in him when he does like the analyst. So he tends to be a little bit nicer about some of the things they're doing wrong that I think you hear some of them.
Yeah.
So if you felt like he was going to be like hating Pitt or whatever, I didn't pick that up. I actually thought he was a little easy on some things that I know he personally could have explained so beautifully because he was a defensive mastermind. That zone defense that he ran at Syracuse for all that years would eat this Pitt team alive, and they're still running it.
It was revolutionary for a certain amount of time there, and then now Adrian Autry, which Pitt will see on Tuesday at the Pete. They run man-to-man now, so change that up. It's going to look a little bit different when you see Cuse come to town. But no, Boeheim obviously knows Capel well, knows John Shire well, so I'm not sure, he was going to light either of them on fire, so to speak, and I'm not sure he was going to, coddle either, so to speak. So I can imagine the tone, if you will, of what Jim Boeheim was going to say. But back to Pitt, and I think going forward, like, this isn't an NCAA tournament team to me.
Nah.
I don't even know if it's an NIT team to me. I don't see first off, the resume's not there. They don't have the resume as of right now for either, quite frankly. By this time last year, Pitt already had a win against North Carolina. They already had a win against Virginia, and they were on their way to a second win against North Carolina around this time. So, and they beat Miami at home. So Pitt was able to stack really important ACC wins, and so far they really haven't been able to do that. They're 1-4 in the conference. So from that standpoint as well, I think we can dial back the expectation a little bit, and we could dial back NCAA tournament all the way. I see them raffle off some wins, Duke, Syracuse, Duke, Georgia Tech coming up, 3 important games. If they win 2 out of the 3 or all 3 of them, God willing, then we can start the conversation back up a little bit.
I'm all about like pulling back on talking about them going anywhere this year. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly don't think they're winning the ACC. I also think we've started out here with what I would consider probably one of the toughest out the gate starts you could have in the ACC. Like,
Sure.
know, you've got Syracuse twice, Duke twice, North Carolina once, and Louisville as your start. That's
rough.
You're going to have a bad record. Like, in all sincerity, Clemson probably would have a 500 record against that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, and I think Clemson's probably going to compete for the top of this you know, conference. So I'm not saying that lightly. I didn't expect Pitt to do great in this stretch. That said, I expect them to look like competitive. I expect them to look like they could steal one, Corey. I could have this same record and feel 50% better about this team than I do right now.
Mm-hmm. They play Carolina better, and I think that's important to a certain level. But then they went against Louisville, and it was not impressive. It just wasn't. The performance was not impressive. I know they didn't have Ish Leggett. He's been hurt with the shoulder. Came back against Duke off the bench. Yeah. But, like, by this point, again, Pitt at least showed something in the sense of, okay, this team, whether they win or lose, is going to be a tough out. This team is going to be something that teams have to take on a Tuesday or a Saturday and play 40 full minutes against. Pitt hasn't really showed that in all of these ACC games. Obviously, the Syracuse game, they blew. The Louisville game was not impressive. They lost to Clemson. Obviously, Carolina, Duke. Like, I'm not seeing that kind of level of compete that last year's team showed through this. Forget wins and losses notwithstanding.
Yeah.
I want to see 40 full minutes from this team where you feel comfortable about what they did and you feel comfortable about, yeah, the result was or wasn't what they wanted, but that team looked good. That team looked competitive. That team looked like it was going to belong in the top half of the conference. Last year's team by this point did that. This year's team, by and large, has not.
Right. We're going to take another break here, and we'll come back and we'll talk just a few more things. I want to talk about your biggest surprises so far this year, both good and bad, and I'll give you mine as well. Let's take a quick break. All right, we're back to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Corey and Gary talking Pitt hoops. It's not been a pleasant conversation. Just in case you're just joining us, which it's time to talk about what I think are our most surprising things. We'll each do a good and we'll each do a bad. Would you like me to start or would you?
You first, please.
Me first. All right. My most surprising thing is that I think Zach Austin has been their most consistent player. And I didn't expect that. I kind of thought he was going to be like their sixth man. You know, this year. I really did. I thought when everything was clicking, he'd probably wind up being their sixth man. And I'm seeing him more as kind of their conscience.
I think Austin's been very good this year. And this comes kind of coincided with my biggest surprise of the year. My biggest surprise is that Blake Hinson hasn't developed the other half of his game. He tested the NBA draft waters and talked about, coming back to Pitt was his best option. But we all know Blake as a streaky three-point shooter. Where's the creation of driving and getting into the paint and getting in low and drawing fouls? He's a big dude. Get him inside. Let him throw a body around. I think the surprise to me is that Blake hasn't really been utilized in that way. And I'm not asking Jeff Cable to completely change up the way Blake Hinson's used, because I still think his ability to shoot the three and spot up and get open looks is still there, and I think it's good. But I would like to see a little more aggressiveness out of Blake Hinson. I thought I would see it this season, and especially without, like we talked about, without Burton and without Cummings and without Sabandi, 3 guards who were really able to get it inside, I thought I was going to see a little bit more of that from Blake this year, and I really haven't.
Yeah, I would say that he's been disappointing, but I can't say it's been a surprise to me. I felt like he was a complimentary player, that he needed a team around him to allow him to shine, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
I don't think he is necessarily the juice that turns on the bulb. I think he kind of just needs to be a guy that takes off here and there. You can't rely on him game in and game out, because he's going to go cold. And you're right. He said, what did he say a million times this offseason? He wanted to improve his slams, right? He kept saying that. Well, what are you going to do? You got to get in the paint to do that. And I never, ever see him in the paint unless he's getting fouled or fouling people.
Or gathering a rebound. But that's my point. Now, disappointment. I'll go first on this one. It's been Federico. Plain and simple. It's been Federico. Yeah. I haven't seen anything from him this year. And I thought this would be a really good opportunity for him to take a step in his game. Obviously has international experience. Obviously came along really strong as a defender. One of the best, if not the best, center as far as defenders go in the ACC last year. I thought I'd see a lot more from Federico this year. Even just from the onset. Like, obviously, he shut down Armando Bacot when Pitt played Carolina last year. That did not happen again. In fact, Guillermo Diaz-Rams started, which that took me by surprise. Excuse me. When Jeff Capel didn't start Federico against Carolina, that told me a lot.
Yeah. He's been out playing him like pretty drastically.
Well, he's been getting minutes, but I thought, like, again, to me, the big tell, I thought Capel was almost by default, because of matchup, going to play Federico, going to start Federico. And Jeff Capel said it, don't take too much stock into starters, which is fine because they all get minutes anyway. But I thought to set the tone in that Carolina game, they would have Federico on Bacot, glued to him. Wax on. Get him on Bacot, get him on there all times, don't leave his side. And that did not happen. And that told me that there's something going here with Federico. Whether it's, I don't think he's injured. Jeff Capel's usually good about announcing injuries, unlike another, certain head football coach at this university. Right. But yeah, that's been the biggest disappointment to me is Federico. I thought I'd see a lot more out of him to start this year.
Yeah, I'd have to say that too. And I would say my biggest disappointment, I guess, when there's no leader on the court, because I don't really think there is, the coach really, really needs to be that. And I feel like he just lets them go on these runs of bad basketball, frantic turnovers. They go into these little 2-minute territories where they just, for some reason, think they're playing street ball all of a sudden. They're throwing the ball all over the place. And maybe that's just all a reflection of the young point guards. But he's not reeling it in either. Like, I'm not seeing him adjust to it, and just, he says we're bad at getting inside. Well, play all bigs once. Let's see what happens. Put in all the bigs and try it. Make it happen. This isn't working. Try something else. That's all I'd like to see. And I feel like he's waiting for the players to mature, and that's it.
I think what last year's team did was it created an identity in a blueprint for what Jeff Capel wanted to do with this year's team.
Yeah.
It's not like Jeff Capel didn't know he had to replace those 4 seniors. It's not like he didn't know he had a complete overhaul coming to his backcourt. But, like, let's not forget either, and I'm not handicapping anything by saying this, they lost Dior Johnson really late in this process of getting ready for the season. Let's not act like that doesn't have anything to do with anything, because that's definitely something.
Let's also not act like he had a ton of experience either.
I agree with that too. But this is a 4-star prospect, once really highly coveted. Obviously, his off the court issues speak for themselves. But this was a guy that Pitt had big plans for. However, here's where I'll dial it back. The same exact thing happened last year with John Hughley. That was the guy that Pitt built this thing around. That team that ran to the NCAA tournament was built around John Hughley. And then Federico stepped up. And then down the stretch, Guillermo stepped up. That's not really happening with this backcourt right now. They're making good plays. They're making some good plays, but we're not seeing that level of production that mirrored or even came close to what that backcourt from last year was able to do.
And I could argue this one he probably wanted to be built through Papa Conte.
For the front court, at least, yeah.
Yeah,
I think there's some truth to that.
That might have changed a little bit of the dynamic,
Sure.
Because sometimes, I think point guards, they wind up getting blamed for some things that are actually going on elsewhere. Like we talk about, like, well, why won't they drive the lane? Well, maybe because Fetty's just standing there like a lump and blocking the lane, but not doing anything to move the traffic around. Maybe they're never ready to receive a pass, and that's why they don't get them. It's not always on the point guards. I do see people open sometimes. The best chemistry that this team has developed still is the twins. When they're on the court together, they know where they're at, and they can pass to each other. But that's the only time they ever go down low was when the twins are there.
Those two have good chemistry, but their coordination's still lacking.
Absolutely. I'm not sitting here telling you they should play all the time.
Sure.
Like, if I'm looking for a nugget of like what I'd like to see, which is a little bit of a change up and starting to work the ball inside, just to keep people honest, to get the looks open for the threes again, you got to do that. There's got to be some change made, and I don't care what it is. If it's that little bit of chemistry and that carries them for 10 minutes, do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's some figuring out to do with this team before the stretch run hits here, and we're into mid-January. Like, they're running out of time, so to speak, to really get the cart back on here. I mean, they have time, but it's we're January 13th as we record this. Before you know it, they're going to be in the first week of March. 6 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, whatever it is. 7 weeks from now, and they're going to be, if they don't figure this thing out, they're going to be in the middle to the bottom of the pack, and it's going to be a tougher road to the ACC tournament, and certainly we're not going to feel good about their chances making any kind of postseason tournament. So this team is a work in progress as of right now, is what I think we're both trying to wrap into here at the end of the day, and that's okay. But with that hard schedule to start off ACC play, it will lighten up, but they have to take care of business in those games.
Yeah. So let's end on a positive note, because that wasn't very positive. But one of my all-time favorite athletes ever, not even just Pitt athlete, Larry Fitzgerald, named to the college Hall of Fame. Pretty much knew that was going to happen at some point, but it's still nice to have it happen, and couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I just can't think of anybody that represents exactly what you'd want a Pitt athlete to be more than Larry Fitzgerald. Unbelievable person.
Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't grow up a Pitt football fan, but even as a kid, you knew Darrelle Revis and Larry Fitzgerald. For me, in the early 2000s, you knew those two. I mean, Larry Fitz was on the cover of one of the NCAA football video games, for God's sake. I mean,
He sure was.
That's an achievement. NCAA 04. I remember it was one of my favorites. Like, the career Larry Fitz had at Pitt, though it was short, was unreal, and probably should have won the Heisman in 03. I think we can make a good argument on that, because back then it really wasn't. Obviously, it's always been a quarterback award to some extent.
Sure. Because I could argue Addison should have been in it instead of Pickett too. So.
Sure, but like, there was also a little bit of a moratorium on voting for underclassmen for that award too at the time. So I think that history, it kind of gets lost in history how great he actually was. Probably should have won the Heisman in 03. Obviously the NFL career speaks for itself. First ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest receivers to ever play the game. Definitely going to be in Canton in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as well, but good to see him get a nod for the College Football Hall of Fame as well. Certainly deserved, certainly earned. And that's a really just, as far as Pitt football players go throughout time, he's one of the greats. No doubt.
Like right now, I think, first of all, for as short as he was here, he sure comes back and acts like he loves it. And he and Aaron Donald and Jarrell Revis, I would say, and James Conner.
Mm-hmm.
That's like this recent batch. And, I don't have personal memories of Marino and Dorsett and, some of the guys, Butkus, that you guys do, or whoever, not Butkus, Ditka, that you guys do. But like, I remember these newer guys, and I love it. And when they get the accolades, it's just time to celebrate a little bit for them. That's all.
And keep in mind, Pitt has, as of right now, 10 Pro Football Hall of Famers, which is high up there on the list of programs that have produced Hall of Fame talent. It's soon to be 11 whenever Larry Fitz gets in, and it'll be 12 the day Aaron Donald gets in. So throughout time, this Pitt program has produced some absolute legends, and they've been one of the best in the country, perhaps underrated, perhaps under the radar at doing so. So I think that's cool. I think that's amazing for Larry, and obviously amazing for the university.
Well, good stuff. And you're going to be driving through an avalanche soon, so it might be the last time we ever see you. So
goodness, don't say that.
Really been great, Corey. I know how scary it is. I know Kathy Hochul doesn't want you guys even heading up there.
Yeah. She said on the address, don't come.
She said it. She also said it was going to be a bad day for you if you did. So,
well, what she doesn't know is that I forged my identity in New York, and I know what it's like to battle these elements. I've dug my car out where the snow is up to the handle. I've dug my car out. I put the manual labor in. I
watch Grumpy Old Men, and you're like, yeah, that's nothing.
I shop at Wegmans. I used to shop at Wegmans. Okay, I get it. So it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be great. So, anyways, stay safe out there, and everybody. Let's just say that what we always do to end the show, H2P.